You are listening to the Roberta Glass True Crime Report, putting the true back in true crime. From New York City, Roberta Glass is now on the record.
My guest is iconoclastic Los Angeles prosecutor John Lewin. Mr. Lewin grew up in Seattle, Washington, and is a graduate of UC Irvine and UC Hastings College of the Law in San Francisco. John Lewin has been investigating, trying, and winning cold cases, and that has earned him the title King of the Cold Cases. Los Angeles Magazine observed he has won more cold cases than any prosecutor in the United States. DA George Gaston bestowed Mr. Lewin with the prestigious Ken Lamb Award before promptly demoting him for speaking out against his pro-criminal policies. Welcome, John Lewin.
Hi there.
So I wanted to start with something that your colleague Ethan Milius said about you. He said, when John's in court, you watch him and you immediately get the sense that he's unlike any other DA you've ever seen. He'll do strange things. He'll be hacking away at his computer very loudly and telling jokes. To truly appreciate his genius, you have to watch the entire trial. He has a plan. Every day is an effort to achieve that plan, and it's somewhat disguised by his eccentricity. Do you agree with that?
I mean, that's quite a compliment. I mean, Ethan and I have worked together on cases for the last 15 years. Three of the 5 last trials I've done, Ethan was on with me. So he's a very close friend. He's an incredible lawyer, probably the best multimedia creator. You know, Ethan's behind all these incredible openings and closings in Durst, the impeachment videos. So, I mean, I've tried, Roberta, I try to have a plan of what I'm going to do from start to finish. And I think that sometimes it's not to your advantage for the other side, for the witnesses, to think that you're necessarily a smart person, that you have a plan, etc. What I try to do is I try to disarm as much as I can. It's myself. I'm not really hiding anything. I'm not pretending to be anybody that I'm not. But when I'm joking, you know, when I'm, you know, bantering around, there's generally a reason for it. And I always know where I'm going, and I always know where I'm trying to get to. So, yeah, I mean, I guess that's nice of Ethan to say. I'll certainly take the compliment.
I think that's, as a fan of yours, watching you in trial, I think maybe the one disappointment is knowing how strategic you are. Things that seem so off the cuff and spontaneous. For example, the donut story that you told at the end of the Durst trial. Is that the same donut story you told in another trial?
Oh, yeah. So that's not a story. I mean, so let me back up.
Okay.
My entire career, I've never told a story in court that isn't true. So I don't try to think of, you know, what's a compelling story I can tell. What I try and do is I try to figure out what's the point that I'm trying to make and how do I best make it. And the point of the donut story is so that people understand how hard it is. What I'm trying to explain to them is, hey, listen, I've just had to sit there for however many hours, days, listening to the defense come up with their bullshit. And I want to get up and I want to start screaming at you guys. And the reason I start with the donut story is because it's really true. It's incredibly hard passing by. My career's gone full circle. I'm back to Inglewood passing Randy's Donuts every day. It's still no easier to drive by it. And so, you know, that story makes a point, and the point is real and it's genuine. And that point is that it's really hard to sit by and not be overly amped up when it's your turn to get up and to testify. So that's why I tell that story. Pretty much every story that I tell, there's a reason, and that's where I'm going with it.
So the reason I want to have you on is because we've been talking about this situation in Canada with JF Gariepy, who's a live streamer. His girlfriend has also the mother of his at least one child has gone missing. He says she's gone out to be a survivalist and to live out in the wild with no money and no cell phone, that she got in contact with him 2 days after he dropped her off in front of a gas station in front of cameras, the cameras being the most important part of that story. And right before this all happened on a live stream, that's the last time she's been seen on camera, he accused her of an act of terrorism and promptly cut off the live stream. So this is a missing person case in Canada that we're looking at. And where do you start in a case like this when someone says, oh, they just left?
So, Roberta, I don't like commenting about active cases. I don't comment about my active cases, and I don't think it's proper to talk about other jurisdictions' active cases. What I can do is I can talk to you about generic.
Hypothetically, if you had a situation where someone said they just left, so what would you do?
Well, so the first thing that you do is you want to get to know your victim backwards and forwards. So who is your victim? So for instance, let's say your victim is a young mom with a steady job that has 2 young children. That's going to be different. I've prosecuted that case before. That's going to be different than I had a different nobody case of a prostitute who disappeared. So the first thing that you want to figure out is this person actually missing, actually dead, or have they just voluntarily absented themselves? So what you need to do is you need to really get to know who your victim is. And you need to try to get to know who your victim is, generally in a way and in a manner that your suspect is not going to know what you're doing. So what I would do is I'm going to learn everything that I can about who the person was, what kind of mother the person was, and I'm going to probably try to find some family members that are on her side that have no allegiance to my suspect, and I'm going to start there. I'm going to try to compile as much evidence as I can early on, demonstrating who this woman is. So if she's a devoted mother, I'm going to want pictures. I'm going to want her day planner. I'm going to want the invitations that she sent out for her son's birthday party, 2 months from now, because all that is going to be in evidence. So generally speaking, when you're dealing with a homicide case in most jurisdictions, certainly in California, you don't get to put on very much evidence about who the victim was in life. It's very unfortunate. That's just the law. So if a woman is murdered, I don't get to put on evidence about what a great mother she is, unless it's penalty phase on a death penalty case, which of course our governor here has suspended all death penalty, and the DA won't charge even special circumstances. So we don't have that issue in Los Angeles and in California anymore. But what we're going to do is we're not going to be able to put on anything about who that victim is. Now, here's the difference. If you have a no body case, then the first thing you have to prove is that the victim is dead. In all the no body cases that I've done, I have 10, 12 cases. I've never had a defense attorney stipulate that the victim died at or near the time the victim disappeared. So whenever you have a no body case, the defense attorney will always want to go with Well, she might still be alive. She might open that door to the next day in court and walk right in. So because of that, I have to prove that the victim's dead. In proving that the victim's dead, it now becomes relevant what kind of mother she was, what kind of person she was. Why is that? Because the defense is basically arguing she's not dead. She voluntarily absented herself. So unless they're going to stipulate, they don't have to stipulate that he did it, but unless they're going to stipulate that she died at or near the time that she disappeared, I get to put on that evidence. So I want to gather everything I can gather to show who she was as a mom, who she was as a wife, who she was as a friend. I want to get as much visual stuff. If I've got pictures of her, at her daughter's birthday party 2 weeks ago, video, I'm going to show that to my jury, because the idea is going to be this woman would not have voluntarily absented herself. It's even more relevant when the defendant's position is, yeah, she took a vacation. She left voluntarily. She went to Tahiti, whatever it might be. So that's the first thing I'm going to do. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to try to figure out a timeline for both my victim and my suspect. What was my suspect doing? How can I document it? Do I have phone records? Do I have internet searches? What's the social media profile? Where has he been? What has he said since then? I'm going to potentially put him under surveillance to try to figure out, what is he doing right now? Does he have a girlfriend? What's the motive for this case? Is it financial? Is he having an affair? I'm going to try to question him. And when I try to question him, I'm not going to let him know that he's a suspect. So I'm going to come in and I'm going to say, hey, listen, your wife is gone. I'm so sorry. We want to figure out what happened to her. Please help us. Many times what will happen is that individuals who have done bad things to their wives, etc., they tend to think they're smarter than you are. So rather than tell you, screw you, I'm not going to talk to you, a lot of them think, if I can just con my way through this interview and not raise suspicion, they'll go away. So I try to play into that. I'm going to try to set up, are there mistakes I can make my suspect make? Am I going to wiretap them? Am I going to try to stimulate him? I'm going to try to gather every statement that he's made. And eventually when I talk to him during that interview, I'm going to have to turn it. There's going to be a point where he's going to figure out, oh my God, he's not looking at me as a witness. He's looking at me as if I did something to my wife. So those are the beginning steps of what I would do.
So you said when you interviewed Robert Durst in 2015, you said, I mostly try cases of men who kill their wives. Is there a kind of is there a similarity in personality you see of men who kill their wives?
No, I would say there isn't. I mean, and there are a lot of different circumstances. Most domestic violence homicides that I've done were not individuals who got up that morning and decided, you know what, I'm going to kill my wife. Even Bob Durst, if I had to guess, I don't even know if it was a murder. Was it manslaughter? I know he killed her. I know he's responsible. I know it's criminal in nature. It wasn't an accident. But I don't think Bob Durst got up that morning and said, hey, you know what, I'm going to kill my wife, Kathy, today. My belief is they got into some kind of argument and he killed her. Did he intend to kill her? I don't know. But that is, in my experience, much more common. Because of that, a lot of the times you're dealing with suspects who are trying to convince themselves they didn't actually do it. They don't want to think about it. They don't want to remember it. This is different than individuals who, for instance, have killed their wife for insurance money, or who have intentionally killed their wife because they want to be with the secretary. Versus,
what's the difference?
Well, the difference is that in a situation where someone is pre-planning to kill their wife, that's a first-degree murder. That's a situation where somebody is deciding in advance. They're not having an argument. They're not losing control. They're making a calculated, premeditated, often well in advance decision that, you know what, for my life to go the way I want it, she's got to go. And those are generally different kinds of people.
And When you're investigating someone like Robert Durst, who's a public person who likes to read and watch all the media on him, what are the challenges in that? Are you very conscious? Do you want to use the media? Do you not? Do you want to keep everything out of the media? What are some of the challenges of that?
Well, the challenges for someone who has been heavily in the media is you want to get every statement they've ever given. So I want to locate what has he ever said and who has he ever said it to? Because the best way to start uncovering lies is to make sure you know what all those lies are in the first place. And one of the problems that Durst had was that he had told so many lies, and he did it so just naturally and automatically that he doesn't remember all his lies. So I was in a situation where I knew that I could prove that he had committed, 500 lies, and I knew all 500, and he maybe knew 20 of them. So I want to learn everything I can learn about whatever they've said. I want to have interviewed the witnesses and have the documentation to prove those lies. And I want to be prepared when he shifts the direction that I'm able to shift in the direction I want to shift to.
So you're reading everything? I mean, does it come to a point where you're saying, does it matter how big or small the lie is? I mean, you want to just know everything about this person through everything you're reading? Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, there's a difference between what I'm going to actually use against them versus what I want to know. So basically, with Bob Durst, I had 1,000 lies. Now, one of the big mistakes that the defense made in the case, and they made a lot of mistakes, was that there were many lies that Bob Durst told that not only did not help him, but actually hurt him. So meaning there were lies he told which were not true that made things worse than they really were. I'm not going to point out any of those lies because those don't help me. I'm going to focus on every lie that he's told that basically he is telling the lies for a, demonstrable purpose of trying to exculpate himself from the situation he's put himself in. So I'll give you, as an example, Bob Durst ended up stating that he had sent Susan Berman two $25,000 checks in October of 2000, 2 months before she was murdered. We only found one of those checks. I believe that, in fact, the first check he had sent a year and a half before. I'm not going to impeach him with that because that just allows the defense to say, see, he's not a liar intentionally. He just mistakes things, or when he lies even when he makes things worse for himself. So therefore, you can't believe anything he says. So no, I don't impeach with every lie that I have. I impeach with the lies that are going to help me get from point A to point B.
There's a moment in your interrogation with Robert Durst where he says that, I was on drugs the whole time I was on being interviewed for the Jinx. And you say, look, I think that's BS. And you kind of challenge him. Were you worried that he was going to shut down at that moment? And did that make him any more truthful? Your kind of rejection of that lie?
Well, so for one, there are certain lies that you can get away with because they're not easily disprovable. Bob is basically saying, at the time I did this interview, I was high on meth. Anyone watching it can tell he's not high on meth, so it's not going to work. So I immediately confronted him because, Bob, that's bullshit. It's not true. And then what Bob came back with was, well, I'm not saying the things that I said weren't true. I'm merely telling you the reason I did the interview. So Bob immediately parrots to, instead of denying what he said, he's now saying, I'm just explaining to you why I spoke to them, which really doesn't matter. One of the problems for Bob is that Bob was a very proficient liar. There's nobody that could lie more quickly and with more conviction than Bob Durst. The problem was most of his lies were not well thought out because he's very lazy. And he comes up with 3 lies trying to tell one lie, and it's just more webs that he's spinning. And in the end, it was not helpful for him.
How is investigating no body cases different than other kinds of cases?
Well, it's different because generally in most murder cases, you don't have to prove that somebody is dead. It's agreed upon that they're dead. It's generally agreed upon how they died, meaning the mode of death, blunt force trauma, etc. And then when you're talking about the manner, is it going to be homicide? Is it going to be suicide? Generally, that's not in dispute either. So most murder cases, it's not an issue of was the defendant shot 5 times and died from the gunshot wounds. The issue is who pulled the trigger, or was it self-defense, or did I have a mental defense? When you have a no body case, you have an additional hurdle before you even start. You have to prove 1, that the person is dead, and 2, that they were murdered. That can be very problematic. Now, unfortunately, most defendants, it's like a moth to light. Once you have an individual where there's no body, defendants and defense attorneys just can't help but try to argue they're still alive. Usually it's a shitty argument. It won't work.
And they knew better in the Durst trial to try that. But what makes a case go cold? And is there?
Well, wait a minute. They did do that with Kathy.
They did. They said she was still out there. I thought they said she was on drugs, and I assume that they were going that way. That she sort of was in a kind of dangerous situation, and like her drug use led her to some sort of dangerous end. That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, one of the problems with the defense was that they never had a full plan. So instead of knowing where they were going, what they did is they blindly flew around, basically taking whatever course, whatever turns until they ran out of gas and then just crashed the plane. So their position on the case was that they couldn't decide, is Kathy dead? We don't know if she's dead. If she is dead, how do you know she didn't die of drugs? How do you know it wasn't an overdose? If she didn't die of drugs and she is dead and she was killed, how do you know Bob did it? So they wanted to basically argue 3 or 4 inconsistent things. It's the same problem they had with Susan Berman. Instead of simply saying, hey, you know what? Susan Berman told people she did these things and that Bob did them, but she was lying. Their first argument was Susan Berman has a bad memory. Okay. So, so she's mistaken in what she is saying that, I'm sorry. The first thing that they said was the witnesses have bad memories. They're mistaken in what Susan told them. The next thing they would say is, well, even if their memory's good, they're lying because they want to help Susan. They want to get Bob in trouble. If you don't believe they're mistaken and you don't believe they're lying, then they're telling the truth, but Susan was lying when she told them that. Those are 3 inconsistent theories. Only one of them at most can be true. And the defense argued all 3 of them. They did the same with Kathy. She's not dead. If she is dead, you don't know if it was murder. If it was murder, you don't know if Bob did it.
And I mean, it was pretty ridiculous. Have there been moments in a case where you feel like you've almost abandoned it and it's turned around? And has there been one thing that turns around a case where you feel like I've got it, or one piece of evidence you've discovered?
Oh, you mean a case that I've said, you know what, we're stuck? Yes, absolutely. I had a case that I worked on for many years. The defendant was a guy named Keith Cole. He was a community college instructor. He called himself a professor. And my memory is in 2001. Can't quote me on it. I think it's 2001. His wife is found stabbed numerous times in her van in the back of a Coco's. And she's been stabbed to death inside the vehicle and then passed out, and the vehicle is like run up against the back of the restaurant. There's no signs of theft. She's in a safe neighborhood. She's a very low risk victim. Very early on, they start looking at the husband, who's a bizarre individual. And every single time that we would come up with some evidence that looked like it was promising, it would just fall through. We had DNA at one point that we thought was going to help us, witnesses that we thought were going to help us, struck out for years and years and years. And then one day, a detective in Sheriff's Homicide is at a bar. It's like Monday Night Football. And a woman comes up to him, and he starts hitting on her. And I like to always say, and she was way out of his league. And I just say that I don't know what she looked like, et cetera, but just to take a shot at him, that any woman that he would have gone up to was out of his league. So they start talking, and she's like, what do you do? Oh, I'm a homicide detective. So he throws that out there, and they start talking, and she says, hey, do you know anything about the community college professor that, killed his wife like 10 years ago? And he kind of plays dumb. He hadn't worked on the case himself, but he knew the case. She ends up saying, well, you know what? My good friend walked in the day after to the faculty bathroom, and the defendant was in the stall, and he was making some crazy statements about the case to himself, talking to himself, a little bit like the Durst case. And we end up finding this individual, going back, and that was enough for me to be able to file the case. A case that I had given up on. I'd had it for many years, and we had just hit roadblock after roadblock after roadblock. Now, unfortunately, before I could get the case tried, he died. I got it through prelim. We were scheduled to do the trial, and he died. So we were unable to get the case done.
What role this is a question for my audience. What role do the families have in these cold cases? Is that a reason? Is a real need for the family to see justice in the case? Does that move a case forward? Would there be a reason to tell a family to be quiet and not talk to the media?
Oh, absolutely. So whenever I start working one of these cases, one of the first things that I will do is I will sit down with the family, assuming the family is separated enough from my suspect that I'm not worried about them talking. That's generally the case, but let's assume so that they are in this situation. And I always tell them the following: hey, listen, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know if I'll be able to get this case filed. I don't know if I get this case filed, what's going to happen. It's going to be a long road, and I just want to make sure that that you guys are up for it, that you're up to what's going to happen. There are a lot of families, and it's very sad, where their life ends the day of the murder. It might be 1984, it might be 2006. They just cannot go forward. And in fact, a lot of those families, what I found is that when the case is over, when we actually get it solved, successfully prosecuted, there's a big hole in their lives because they've spent 20, 30, 40 years completely obsessed with getting justice for their loved one. And now it's done, and their purpose kind of dies out. So the families play a key role, and we always try to keep them as informed as much as we can without risking the case, being, detrimentally affected.
So this is from the audience member Free Bougainville. excuse my pronunciation, what is the fastest a successful prosecution is possible in a no-body case after disappearance?
Well, I mean, it can be extremely quick. So I'll give you an example. If you have I did a case with a prostitute who had disappeared, and I had a bunch of blood. I had a crime scene, and we were able to do a recreation where, to create the stains on the carpet that a witness had observed, it would have taken a level of blood where the donor of that blood would have been dead or in extremely critical condition. And of course they weren't there. So right there, I already knew that the person is dead. Then the question is putting it together. But obviously, one of the issues on a no body case where the defense is that the person is still alive is, let's say that you have a really devoted mother, okay? And she disappears and she's gone 4 days. And so for instance, let's say my wife disappeared. My wife is gone 3 days. I can tell you, because I know her, I know what she's like, I know the contact. If no one's heard from her in 3 days, there's 100% chance she has either been killed, she has been disabled, etc. But that is not as strong of evidence that she is gone as if it's been 5 years or 10 years. So it really depends on the lifestyle of your victim, the aggressiveness of the police agency, the prosecutor, and kind of what's a reasonable scenario, because it's going to be different depending on who you are. So if you have a prostitute who is saying that she has a terminal disease, who has a history of going from town to town, which was my case, the fact that she's disappeared doesn't make your case. Conversely, you have a mother, a doctor with a thriving practice, and no one's heard from them in 2 weeks. That's probably going to be enough evidence for you to conclude that they didn't voluntarily absent themselves.
So someone very isolated, and say like someone who's very like a hermit, so maybe someone like me, who isn't very social, goes a long time from talking to people. You need what I'm hearing is you need like a much longer amount of time, or some really solid evidence that that there was a crime.
Yeah, it's not necessarily about being a hermit. So for instance, let's say that hermit has a routine where every day they do XYZ. Mm-hmm. They always get the mail at this time. They always get the paper. They have coffee every day at this location. They've done it for 30 years. Even though they don't live with anybody and they're a hermit, when that routine is disturbed, then you have a good argument that person has, and then you look at, would they have voluntarily absented themselves? So the issue becomes, how reliable are the routines? How reliable is their kind of day-to-day lifestyle? Is it reasonable to believe that they would have voluntarily taken off? Those are the factors that you have to weigh.
And did I hear you correctly in the beginning of this interview? You said something like, or I thought I heard you say something like, you want to start with the people that are, was it like not involved or more neutral, sort of like smallerly involved in their lives, interviewing them? Is that what you said, or did I misunderstand?
No, if I can, I want to start with the people that are closest to them, who are not my suspect, and who are not the suspect, and who are not going to communicate with the suspect. I want to learn as much as I can, because generally speaking, when I'm going to communicate with a suspect, it's going to be on my timeline. I might have an operation going. I might have a stimulation. Who knows what I'm going to have going? I want to control how and when that suspect discovers that we're looking at him.
Do you think Robert Durst knew he was a suspect right away? I mean, there's sort of a true crime saying, well, of course, it's always going to be the boyfriend, or it's always going to be the husband.
Which crime?
I'm talking about Kathy Durst. In killing Kathy Durst, do you think he felt he was a suspect? I mean, I remember because, I told you my grandmother knew him as a little boy. In the 90s, it was in the papers, all the, at least the New York Observer, about maybe he dropped her from a plane, or maybe, there was always sort of these speculations about what happened to Kathy Durst for decades before, for a long time before he was even prosecuted.
Yes, I believe that Bob always knew he was a suspect. The main reason Bob knew he was a suspect is Bob knew that he killed her. So when you're a defendant, it's kind of like this. You can have a video of a crime, okay? And in the video, it looks like the defendant, but you're not sure. You follow me so far?
Yes.
You're watching them. I will show that video to my defendant, because when he's watching it, you know what he knows? He's going, oh my God, it's me. He knows it's him. He was there, and he can't really separate out the fact, well, it's not that great an image of me, etc. So for Bob Durst, Bob knew he killed Kathy. So he knew he was a suspect from the start. He also knew that the cops were asking him a lot of questions. Now, did he think that he had dispatched a lot of their concerns? Probably. Bob's the kind of guy, Bob's attitude is he doesn't really care. Bob doesn't really think about what the consequences are. He doesn't really think about how's he doing. He just does it.
Mm-hmm. This is from Craig. How would an investigation benefit from not putting up missing person posters? Are missing person posters helpful in how helpful are they to an investigation? Are you going to get a lot of sort of mistaken sightings and things like that?
Yes, you're going to. So depending on, they're both good and bad. One, you need to show that you've done everything that you can do. The problem is when you're doing it, you're almost always going to generate a lot of false leads, and you have to follow up on every lead. And, you'll have, oftentimes, particularly in high profile cases, you'll have, a call from Wichita, Kansas, and, a sighting in Mobile, Alabama, and they occur on the same day. Now, here's what you know for sure, right? Both of those cannot be correct. Would you agree?
Yes.
And oftentimes, none of them are correct. So you have a lot of false evidence you have to track back, but you don't really have a choice. So, I always recommend if somebody's missing, you do everything you can do to find them.
What do you think are some common mistakes people make when investigating cold cases?
Well, I think probably the most common mistake is to believe that you have to have physical evidence and that you have to have a body. You don't need either. It certainly makes it more difficult. And I certainly will agree that a lot of prosecutors are very hesitant to file no body cases, particularly no body cases without crime scenes. But that is a major mistake that is made. And then the other thing is that historically, circumstantial evidence is just not considered very valid. I was listening to a podcast yesterday, and it was a podcast involving there's litigation going on right now in the real estate market. There's a big lawsuit in Illinois involving the national realtors being sued because of commissions that they've put on, when they shouldn't have, et cetera. And they're interviewing a guy who basically tried to sell his house, and he tried to do it with a discount non-realtor where they would basically take like 2% and not give the buyer's agent any money. And they asked him, well, did you think you were blacklisted? He said, oh, absolutely. But I didn't have any evidence. Other than the fact that it was a really hot market when I sold my house, not one person came to look at my house. So other than that circumstantial evidence, I didn't have anything. And I'm listening to him. He literally says, other than circumstantial evidence, which isn't really evidence, I didn't have anything.
That's the best evidence. Yeah.
Best evidence. And in fact, in many states like California, jurors are instructed that circumstantial evidence is just as good as direct evidence. It just depends on the particular evidence. So that's a big mistake that is made.
What makes circumstantial evidence some of the best evidence besides what you just said about how jurors are instructed?
Well, circumstantial evidence, and I want to divide between two kinds of circumstantial evidence. DNA and fingerprints are circumstantial evidence. So I'm going to talk about non-physical circumstantial evidence because that's what most people think of. When you ask most lawyers and a lot of judges, hey, is DNA our fingerprint evidence, is that circumstantial direct evidence? A lot of them will say it's direct evidence. It's not. It's circumstantial evidence because you're not seeing the person touch the item, but their fingerprint being on the item is a circumstantial inference that they had to have touched the item in the past. So what is interesting about non-physical evidence, circumstantial evidence is it doesn't lie. It's not mistaken. So as an example, you can have a witness in a robbery case and they are completely honest and they just miss ID, all right? They just make a mistake. They go, yep, that's the guy, and it turns out it's not the guy. In a circumstantial evidence case where the guy is having an affair with the secretary and the wife has said she's going to divorce him, and the husband has told his buddy, I'm not paying her X amount of dollars. That is all circumstantial evidence. That evidence is not mistaken. In other words, you can prove those things happen. He said those things. What is then in question is what does that circumstantial evidence, what inferences does it lead to? And in my opinion, good circumstantial evidence leads to only reasonable inferences, oftentimes only one reasonable inference, and that's why I like it so much.
Yeah, that's a good point. So another question, how common is phone tapping, electric surveillance of a suspect in a missing person case? How often do you use that kind of surveillance and phone tapping?
Well, you know what? I mean, those are things that I don't want to get into about what I use and don't use.
Okay. That's fair.
Yeah, I mean, legally, you in California, you need to secure a judge's order to wiretap somebody. You also need to secure orders now to track them with a tracker on their vehicles. You didn't used to.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead. So yeah, those are tools that are utilized.
There's a law that just got passed in certain parts of Canada. It's a missing persons law where as soon as a person is missing, they have access to cell phones, records, computer searches, financial records. Do you think, is that law, would you be supportive of that law? Could that law be done here in America? And do you think it would be helpful?
Well, I mean, it sounds like it would certainly be helpful. The issue that you would have is we have a Fourth Amendment regarding search and seizure. The recent history of Fourth Amendment law is to become more protective of the individuals who own the property, criminal defendants, etc. So I don't know what kind of success you would have here. Sounds very good to me.
Okay. Yeah, that's what I thought. I said the same thing. I said that to my boyfriend. We were talking about it. I was like, that's got to be a Fourth Amendment violation. What did you get out of the Jinx? And were the outtakes more helpful? Or, I mean, obviously that, what we saw at the end was edited, where the confession is a bit edited. Was that hurtful to prosecute? Was that, I know the defense made a lot of the edited confession and the bathroom at the Jinx. Yep. Edited in any meaningful way, but still.
In a universe of stupid arguments that they made, that was one of the stupidest. So originally, we spent a fortune having the important video gone through to prove it was not edited. Okay. The defense ended up stipulating before trial that the evidence we were admitting was not edited. So we had the raw footage. So if we have the raw footage, does it matter what Gariepy used in the jinx?
No, right.
I don't know what they were thinking. So, if you want to put the jinx on trial, you can put the jinx on trial. The problem is we had the unedited footage. The unedited footage is just as damaging as the edited footage. By the way, just to defend Gariepy and Smerling for a second, the edits that they made, although not helpful to my case because they ended up literally, there were certain questions that Bob was asked, and then the answer is not the answer he gave to that question. But if you watch the unedited and you watch the edited, the general things that he's saying are the same. He's basically saying, and in my opinion, in a lot of ways, I found the unedited to be more damning than the edited. He's basically saying,
Why so?
What?
Why so? How so? How was it more damning?
So in the unedited, they spend a long time where Bob is being shown the cadaver note, and he's being shown the serum note. And he's basically saying, well, yeah, same writing, same block letters. And then he says, but everybody prints in block letters. You can't, one block letter is the same as the other block letter. And that's not true. People's printing is different. Everybody knows it. So Bob goes on. He goes, look at that. If you look at the B over here, and this B over here, the expert, and it was not helpful to him. So in the end, I felt that the unedited video was very damaging for him.
This is just. Do you know what he's talking about when he says, "I want this"? It sounds like he's going to steal the soap or the something in the bathroom. He goes, "Oh, I want this." What was he talking about in the bathroom there? Do you know?
I don't have any idea. For all I know,
okay. It's just such an odd thing. I always wondered.
Well, he's a straight. The most damaging thing he said in the bathroom was not the kill them all. Of course, that was not the most damaging thing. If you listen, before the door even closes, you hear, "There it is. You're caught." That's the first thing that he says. So listen, the video, the bathroom audio, excuse me, was a good piece of evidence. But this is the thing about circumstantial cases. When you have a circumstantial case like this, by the way, I had circumstantial evidence, we had direct evidence. This was an overwhelming case. I mean, literally, we had arguably 3 unintentional confessions while Bob was testifying. Okay. That just doesn't happen. So we had an incredible amount of evidence. But even when you're talking about a purely circumstantial case, let's say there's 50 circumstantial pieces. Let's say I think that piece number 4 is extremely powerful. You don't like piece number 4 that much, but you love piece number 7. I'm looking at number 7 going, I don't really see it. In the end, I'm not trying each individual piece. Another way of looking at it is I'm going to argue, hey, listen, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, when you look at this circumstantial evidence, when you put it all together, here's what it shows. Some of you might be more moved by this piece. Some of you might be more moved by this piece. You don't have to agree which piece. You just have to agree that in your mind that the case has been proven beyond a reasonable doubt. So that's one of the reasons I really enjoy circumstantial cases.
And Bob Durst had a lot of success with a defense in Galveston over the murder of Morris Black, saying he was on the autism spectrum. Why do you think he went with that defense? Was that defense put together so his behavior would look more, so to kind of normalize his behavior? And why wasn't it used in your trial?
So first of all, Bob had a professor. Bob had a doctor, Milton Altschuler, who was all prepared to testify in Galveston. But when Bob did his own testimony, Bob was able to get out on his own that he allegedly had this autism, etc. So the defense decided they didn't need to call Altshuler. So they were planning on calling Altshuler in my case. And I was loaded for bear. I mean, I had so much good stuff. I literally had, I wanted them to call Altshuler so bad. This is how disorganized they were. Altshuler refused to talk to me. So I found every interview Altshuler had ever done. I looked at the few articles he had done, every statement he'd ever given. He'd been on TV with Bob Durst, etc. He'd given a deposition before. I had everything. When the first trial started, Dick DeGuerin's daughter literally premiered. They had a podcast on Dick's famous cases. And they ended up, when the trial started, I can't remember if it was when the first trial started in 2000, beginning of 2020, or if this is on the retrial in 2021. I can't remember which it was. But his daughter interviewed Dick DeGuerin, and they released the Bob Durst episode while our trial was going on. And one of the people that his daughter interviewed was Milton Altshuler, the doctor. And on the podcast, Altshuler tells a story. I mean, you can't make this up. Basically, he tells, I'm not going to get into the whole long thing, but it's a joke about, 4 doctors get together, a surgeon, a psychiatrist, a coroner, etc. And this is coming from Altshuler. And the point of the joke is that the other doctors basically are agreeing that, the one doctor is really smart, but he doesn't do anything. That's the internist. And the surgeon is like, he doesn't want to think. He just wants to cut people up. And the forensic pathologist is like, you're dealing with dead people, so it doesn't really matter what you do. And the psychiatrist is just completely full of shit. And this is a joke that Altshuler is telling himself. And I'm like, oh my God, I want to get this guy in the stand. I'm going to gut him like a fish. And so I was really excited. I was loaded for bear. I had my whole outline done. And we get ready, and I'm asking, he refused to be interviewed during the pandemic. So now we're starting back up again. And I want discovery. What do you get? What's he going to testify to? And DeGuerin comes to court and basically says that Altshuler had a serious stroke months before, and they didn't even know it. So he couldn't testify. So he was about 90 by then. And so these guys were planning on calling this 90-year-old doctor, and they hadn't even checked on his condition for more than a year. So I was
I remember that. Yeah.
I was very disappointed that he wasn't called as witness. I even said to Dick at the time, hey, listen, I'll stipulate he can testify remotely. No problem, because I just wanted to get him on the stand. But wasn't able to do it. I very much wanted Bob to put on the autism defense. I had voir dired on it. God knows why. Their jury consultant and the lawyers themselves we had some jurors who had experience with individuals in their families or in their work environments, who were autistic or who had Asperger's. And they somehow thought that was going to help Bob. I knew that it would be the opposite, that these people would be furious that their loved ones who have these conditions that they have to deal with are now going to be branded with the fact that somehow that's what, makes that could make them a killer. So they just missed the boat entirely. One of a number of boats they missed.
You've been up against a lot of very famous high-priced lawyers, Robert Shapiro, Dick DeGuerin, Chesnoff. Is there anything about going up against a lawyer like that's different than any other kind of lawyer?
So here's what I can tell you. And I'm going to be very honest with you. I love going up against lawyers like that. My experience is most of them aren't very good. They think they're really good. They're used to basically, in essence, not playing a fair game. So they don't know the law. They're not particularly good lawyers, but they have some kind of power and influence. They are able to intimidate judges wherever they're from. So I love going up against lawyers like that because they think when they're coming in that their reputation is going to somehow intimidate me. And what I look for is from day one. So as an example, I made sure I knew it was really important to Dick to be the biggest personality in the courtroom. I knew that was really important to him. So I made sure I was always the biggest personality in the courtroom. I didn't.
How'd you do that? How'd you do that? I mean, you can't shrink yourself down in the courtroom. I wouldn't think.
I can if I want to. I can shrink myself down, or I can put myself out. I definitely put myself out deliberately in this case. I'll give you an example, which is a good story. So the very first day that we start hearings on this case, I believe it was Valentine's Day, February 14th of 2017, if I remember. And we come into court, and my wife is a very, very, very accomplished surgeon. You would never know it. She's the most modest, unassuming person you'd ever meet. But she is literally the world's leading microtia surgeon. She makes ears for little kids, and people come from all over the world to get a Lewin ear. My wife is 300 times more accomplished than I am. So my wife had a cancellation that day, meaning a surgery, whatever. Somebody was sick. She couldn't do the surgery. She says, "Hey, can I come into court with you?" I'm like, you know what? I mean, there's going to be a bunch of media there. It's not like bring your wife to court day. I don't want to know. So she doesn't come in. We go in, and Dick has an entourage. I mean, an entourage. So he gets up when we're going to start the day, and he starts introducing people in the audience like it's a boxing match. Not making this up. There was a kid that was working for him that had been a quarterback. He was from Texas. He was a high-level recruit. He had originally either played at Virginia and then transferred to Arizona or Arizona State, one or the other. Dick is now, this is Mike Jones. Now, Mike Jones was a 4-star recruit out of, Permian, Texas high school. Now, he originally played for the University of Virginia. He just finished up. Now he's in law school. He's introducing all these people, okay, including his wife. Goes down the line. I can't believe it. I mean, he wants to take over the courtroom. So at lunchtime, I call my wife. I said, "Hey, come on down." So my wife comes down at lunch, and at 1:30, I get up and say, "Your Honor, this is my wife, Dr. Cheryl Lewin." I introduced my wife, and afterwards, you can't make this up, Dick's wife comes up to my wife and says the following: "Hi, I'm Carly. I'm wife number 3. 3's a charm." And my wife says, "Oh my God, I'm wife number 1. I hope we make it." So anyway, those are the kinds of things. If you watch any time in court, I always made sure that whatever they did, whatever attention they tried to get, whatever point they tried to make, I always made sure that I was bigger, and I knew it bothered them, and that's why I did it. And I enjoyed it from start to finish.
That's so interesting. I have a question from Craig about Susan Giordano. Durst gave to Susan Giordano boxes containing other people, the depositions related to the Black case. Is it normal for a defendant to read all his depositions?
No. Here's what happened. Bob had given Susie Giordano what we call the Giordano boxes. There were 67 boxes that Bob had. His wife, Debbie, had them at some point, and Bob requested that they be sent to Susan Giordano. So Susan had those boxes. Those boxes had all kinds of materials in them. Many of those materials were protected by attorney-client privilege. But since Bob had shared them with Susan, and then when Bob was asked by Gariepy and Smerling, do you have any documents? He sent them to Giordano and told Giordano, God, give them whatever they want. So anyway, that's what happened.
That's how the envelope came. That's how the envelope got to them, right? With the Beverly.
No.
No, that's different. Okay.
The Sarab note. So what happened is that it became clear that Andrew's theory and the questions that he was asking to Susan's son, he wasn't technically her son, Sarab, the implication was that Susan was kind of, soft blackmailing him, for lack of a better term, which I don't think that she was I don't think she was blackmailing him. I think that she would never have intentionally and knowingly betrayed him. But I think that she knew that she had a big secret on Bob, and she knew Bob was very wealthy, and she wanted help. So Sarah, in being interviewed and wanting to defend Susan's reputation, remembered and wanted to establish, hey, listen, before the police ever started contacting, reopen their investigation, Bob was already giving Susan money. So meaning that would prove that it wasn't some blackmail thing. And so Sarah remembered, you know what? I have this letter that references a check from March of 1999 before the case was reopened. So he found it and then gave it to Gariepy and Smerling.
Okay. You worked with a detective for a long time named Wallace.
James
Wallace. You're right, Jim Wallace. And did he has a book called Cold Case Christianity?
Yes.
My understanding is you're an atheist. Did he have that conversion to Christianity during the time that you were working with him?
So I'm not an atheist.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
No. I'm just completely unreligious.
Okay.
I guess you could say agnostic. Jim Wallace and I started working together in 1996 or 1997. Jim's one of my best friends, one of the finest people I've ever met. And although I've worked with an incredible amount of gifted detectives, I've worked with some legends. The best detective I ever worked with was Jim Wallace. Jim and I have done more cases than anybody. I've done more with him. Jim, when I met him, was getting so Jim has a really interesting story. Jim, his father was a Torrance police officer. And can I just, digress for a second?
Yes.
So Torrance is a town in Los Angeles, maybe the fifth, something like that, biggest city in LA County, maybe 200,000 people, something like that. So Jim's dad got on in the 50s, and Jim Sr., Jim the First. And back then, this is before they had radios when he started. So what would happen is if you were working downtown Torrance and you had to arrest somebody, there was no radio to call. You didn't have a portable radio with you. So what you would have to do is you'd literally have to fight this person, drag them to a pole that you could hit a button, and that pole was high enough where it would light up and they could see on the other side of town a dispatch, and they would send somebody over there. Police work was so much different. I mean, a lot of these guys, they were brawlers because they had to be. It was physically a really difficult job. Jim ended up he got his master's in architecture from UCLA and graduated summa. He's a brilliant guy. He became an architect and then decided, you know what, this isn't for me, and became a police officer like his dad. Jim was a hardcore atheist. And at some point in the few years before I met him, not that long, he had a conversion and ended up going to divinity school. Jim ended up getting a master's in divinity. So when I met Jim, Jim was finishing school and he was also operating his church. And Jim is very religious. And Jim would try for years, he would try to convert's not the right word, but, Jim believes that, in his view, if you don't accept, Jesus Christ, you're not going to have a good ending. And so Jim, because he cares, would always try. And he would get very frustrated with me because it's not that I'm a hardcore atheist like he used to be. I'm just really disinterested. So to this day, he and Ethan will have arguments about this stuff because Ethan's an atheist is like Jim is. And so they can engage and discuss stuff. But so Jim was already very religious when I met him. What was your original question? Now it escaped me.
My question is, what did you learn from him?
Oh, I learned, Jim's an incredible detective. We really did this thing like a team. I had a lot to do with the investigative part, and Jim had a whole lot to do with the prosecution part. The father of these multimedia presentations, which Ethan is now the best at anybody in the country, I think. Jim is the master. Jim started. Jim was the master of PowerPoint before anybody knew what it was, 25 years ago. And Jim is extremely charismatic. He's a gifted detective. He's extremely genuine. And he and I would work cases together. Jim would always get frustrated because when we were preparing our presentations, he's a nationally sought after speaker. He's written a lot of books, and Jim really wanted to do my job. Jim wanted to come into court and give the arguments, et cetera. And he would have been great, but he's not a lawyer. He couldn't do it. So he would get frustrated and we would fight nonstop about, how it was going to look. Jim wanted very few words in his PowerPoints because he's very artistic. Jim would make shadows. He would spend hours and hours to make a shadow of a folded paper in a slide. Like, Jim, it doesn't fucking matter. I don't need it. But that's what he would do. But in the end, I would be the one that would have to give the presentation. So it needed to be done my way. Now, when we would do these things, Jim had two little boys who were probably, 5-7 years old back then. And I would go to Jim's house and we would work. Jimmy, the third, has now been a police officer in Torrance for 10 years. He's the third generation. And his younger brother, David, is a pediatric anesthesiologist. So I've watched them grow up. So Jim and I are very close. I still talk to him frequently. He's as good as they get.
So what surprises me about that is is you're very unusual as a lawyer because I sense a deep moral outrage. So I feel like, I guess maybe I'm confusing. You don't have any interest in where did that come from? That morality, that kind of deep sense of morality? Is that something you got from your family, or?
I don't.
You don't see yourself that way?
This is what I can tell you. I am not the kind of person, and have never been the kind of person. You'll hear this from people. I am a lawyer. I can advocate for any position. That's not me. Never has been. I am somebody who believes. Can you hold on one? I apologize.
Yeah, just, you want me to mute?
Yeah.
I'll just mute you for a second. Okay. If you're just tuning in, we are talking to the king of the cold cases, John Lewin, the winningest cold case prosecutor in the country. won more cold cases than any other. I think it was 17 or 18, maybe 18, maybe Robert Durst was 17 or 18, something like that. Do you guys have questions? All right, I'm going to go take a break myself. When we get back from the break, maybe more with John Lewin, talking cold cases. Okay, you're back. You're not. Okay. If you are enjoying this episode of my True Crime Report, please hit the thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and share this episode. Get access to exclusive podcasts and other bonus content by becoming a patron today. If you have a question or comment for me, shoot me a super chat and I'll do my best to answer it and read it on air. Thanks so much. Now back to the show. Okay, I don't want to. Do you have time? Do you have time to answer a few more questions or do you have to go, Mr. Lewin? Oh, you're muted. Hold on 1 second. Let me unmute you. Okay. Should be unmuted. Oh, you're still muted.
No, that was just me pretending. I'm
That's unmuted. So funny.
Okay, I'm unmuted. No, I'm good. We're off today for Veterans Day. For any veterans that are listening, thank you very much for your service. Although I think it's officially tomorrow, but this is the day that we take off. So no, I'm good. I have, I'm waiting. We have dinner plans, but my wife is not home yet. So I'm good.
Okay. So I have a question from the audience about trickery in investigations, things like lying to suspects. They've just outlawed it in New York State for juveniles, Mr. Big stings, things like that. What is your feeling? Do you feel like police should be able to lie to suspects?
Absolutely. Let me give you an example. And I do this so it's legal in California. And during jury selection, during voir dire, this is an example that I always give. I will ask, does anybody have a child? And someone will raise their hand. Does anyone have like a 15, 16-year-old kid? You'll have a hand go up. And we'll say, okay, does your kid ever lie to you? And sometimes I'll get, no, my kid does not lie. And I'll go, okay, does anybody have a real child? And someone will put their hand up. I'll go, okay. Juror number 4, you said you have a daughter. Okay. Does your daughter have a curfew? Yeah. What's the curfew? 11 o'clock. Sometimes 12. And by the way, when I'm talking, so they'll go, curfew's 12 o'clock. Go, 12 o'clock at 15? Man, that's you're pretty lenient out there. And they'll laugh, et cetera, what it might be. Or they might go, curfew is, 8 o'clock. Wait, 8 p.m. Didn't you say your kid's 17? So I'll have fun with the jurors while I'm doing this. So they'll tell me, yeah, curfew's at 10 o'clock. So I want to give you the following scenario. And I know this isn't true, but let's say your daughter has a 10 o'clock curfew. And at 9:59 p.m., 9:58 p.m., you fall asleep and she's not home yet. All right. And they'll say, I would never fall asleep if my daughter's home. I understand it's my example, but you fall asleep. When you get up the next day, are you going to do the following? Are you going to go over to your daughter and say, hey, listen, I stayed up till 9:58 p.m. last night. What time did you get home? And you can, Roberta, are you going to say that?
No, right.
Why?
Because, you want to keep your child safe.
No. What's the, no.
What? No. Oh, am I the child in this situation?
No. I'm saying it's 9:58 p.m.
Yeah.
So you're telling your daughter, hey, listen, I was up till 9:58 p.m. last night. Your curfew's 10 o'clock. What time did you get home? So in my scenario, you fell asleep at 9:58 and you tell them that. Are you going
Right.
to tell
Oh,
them?
you're going to say I came home at 9:59 or 10, right? It's
Absolutely.
under it. Right.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, I came right. Here's what you're going to say. I waited till past your curfew last night and you weren't home. Now, that's not true because you fell asleep at 9:58 p.m. If, in fact, your child got home at 9:59 p.m., they're going to tell you that. Generally speaking, that is not what's going to happen. So what's going to happen is you're going to get some further lie from your kid, etc. What's the point? The point is that generally speaking, people don't tell the truth because they want to tell the truth. People tell the truth because you put them in positions where they have to, or more likely, people will lie because they don't want to suffer the consequence of those lies. So it's always interesting to me where someone will say, "Oh my God, you told the guy that you had an eyewitness who saw him rape the old lady, and then he confessed to it." Well, let me tell you my 30 years experience. And listen, are there crazy exceptions that you could give me? Yeah, there's always some crazy exception, some traumatized juvenile, etc. But people don't confess to raping the old lady because you lied to them and said, "Hey, I have a witness who saw you do it." So I don't buy that for a second.
So what about false confessions? I mean, I'm just trying to play devil's advocate here.
I rarely do they happen. In very rare circumstance, they do. They are highly unusual, and they are manipulated by these false confession experts who come in. They have an agenda. They're getting paid a bunch of money. They're basically, Liz Loftus dealing with false confessions. They have the same credibility. Don't buy it for a second.
I've come to the similar conclusion. Scott Survival has a question for you. He's asking, how important is it to establish that the suspect is lying about the circumstances in his wife's disappearance and getting a conviction in a no-body case?
Oh, it's huge. It's absolutely huge. So, for instance, I tried a no-body case. Probably my second most difficult no-body case involved a guy who had killed his wife. The main evidence that we had on the case is that he had given 3 different versions of the last time he saw her. So his first version was, "I woke up in the middle of the night and we had a little argument and she left the house." The second version was, "I woke up and she was backing out of the garage and I saw the car lights." And the third version was, "I woke up and she was gone." Now, even if you want to argue that someone is going to forget, and they can call, Loftus will come in and say, memory is not like a video recorder and you can forget, etc. I can tell you that if your wife disappeared, your last memory of her, you're going to hold on to for the rest of your life. You will relive that 1,000 times. Does that make sense, Roberta?
Yes.
Now, even if you want to somehow agree,
it's just like, I mean, sorry to interrupt, but just like Loftus says, just to quote her, not that I think she's such an authority or important, but just that when you have an emotionally heightened moment, it's going to be burned in your brain.
Absolutely. They call them flashbulb memories, and she will have to concede some of those, but absolutely. But even if you want to concede that, I can explain why they don't remember, here's your problem. That doesn't explain why you're giving 3 different versions of it. In other words, it's nearly, in my opinion, it's not rational or reasonable to believe that someone is going to forget the last time they saw their wife when they've been questioned about it. It's been the key mystery of their entire life. But the idea that that's going to change over time doesn't make any sense. So it's incredibly important. And that's how I made that case. That was the evidence that we had.
That was it? You just had his 3 stories? And that's
3
it?
stories. And one of the stories was that we have a little more than this.
let's back up. I mean, the other evidence that I had was that she was having an affair with at least one other guy at the time of the disappearance. And she was asking him to sell the house. And her parents were telling him, don't do it. And so even though he wouldn't admit that he knew she was having an affair, he believed that she wanted to leave him. So I had that. He also admitted they were arguing that night. And then the final thing I had is that originally he said that after she disappeared, about a week later, she came back to the house. And he knew it had to be her because they used to hide their money in a butter dish in the refrigerator. And half of the money from the butter dish was gone. So even if it was a burglar, not can only take half of it. So that was my evidence in the case. And to make matters worse, his statements were not taped. And there's an instruction that says that a jury is to view untaped statements by a defendant with caution. So it was a really difficult case. He testified and he ended up getting convicted. That was a very unusual case because I had offered him a voluntary manslaughter that he didn't take. He was convicted. And then after sentencing, he asked to talk to me and he confessed to me that he killed her. He served his time in prison and he ended up getting parole.
Is that your dog?
That's Mouse. Mouse, say hi, bud.
You're so cute.
That's one of them.
I'll interview him next.
Yeah, he's so basically, he ended up getting paroled about 3 years ago, and he's doing great. He very sad case. I still talk to him. We ended up, he's a guy. The only time I went to his parole hearing and advocated for him to be released, the parole board screwed him over, and I ended up resentencing him to voluntary manslaughter for murder, and he ended up getting out after 13 years.
Why did you have so much sympathy for him?
Well, it was when I had found out. So what happened is that he no prior history, no prior record, no prior domestic violence with her. And what I ended up discovering, I knew she was having an affair. They got married very young. She outgrew him very quickly. She had an affair with an ex friend from high school of theirs. She told that friend that she was divorced when she wasn't. He found out about it, was very upset, punched a wall, punched a mirror. He worked with her father, went to the father. The father said, you got to fix it. He tried to do it. Fast forward, she's having at least one other affair with somebody else, wants to leave him. And the catalyst was she ended up, one of her sisters was getting married the next week. She was murdered the day before Ronald Reagan was killed, was shot, not killed, in 1981. And her sister was due to get married the next weekend, and she told him that night that she wanted to bring another man to the wedding. And this is a wedding that's with his family, because her family was like his family. And he snapped and he killed her. It doesn't excuse what he did, but had I known everything originally, it would have been a manslaughter, not a murder.
Have you had a investigation where the suspect is doing a lot of interviews or media interviews, and have they showed up in court? I'm thinking, of course, Robert Durst, all of them.
Only Bob.
Only Bob.
Bob. Bob's the only one that would. Bob liked to, fly a little too close to the sun. He enjoyed it. Most people are going to run away from the media when they have those kinds of secrets. Bob just couldn't help himself. He loved the attention.
And Tinsel is asking, how useful or how much attention are likely to be paid to statements or claims made online by suspects?
Well, I mean, it depends. A statement is a statement. So the issue is, can you prove that the person actually made the statement? So it's a question of foundation. When something's online, it's harder. How do you prove that they're the one that actually made the statement? But that's no worse or better than any other statement.
Right. What's been the most difficult defense that you've ever come up against at trial?
I tried a case many years ago, my first murder, and the facts were my victim was a crackhead, drug addict, and he had been kicked out of the house because he was stealing from his mother and grandmother who lived there. And the grandmother would let him in when she wasn't supposed to, and he would steal more. His mother had brought in my victim was like in his 20s, and she had brought in a guy in his early 30s who was renting a room there. And she had not been truthful to me. She actually had an affair with the guy. And of course, even though I asked, did not tell me that actually happened. And so what occurred is that one day she and the renter come home, and her son, the drug addict, is in the house with grandma when he's not supposed to be. And the mom says, you got to go. And he doesn't want to leave. And the mom tells him again, you got to go. And he says to his mom, his girlfriend was pregnant. He says, now, Mom, I know you want to see your grandson when he's born. Basically threatening that, if she kicked him out, she would not get to see her unborn grandson. The guy renting the room gets extremely angry at this statement. And he says to my victim, step out, let's step outside. And so he steps outside, but the victim does not follow him. The next thing you know, the boarder comes back into the house, takes a gun out, and fires 9 shots into the victim's back. It kills him. I had a very bad judge who did not know the law and allowed the defense to put on evidence that my victim had molested a young girl and the mom had been home when he had done it. So my victim was a really despicable person. And the defendant took the stand. It was a crazy case. The defendant was a militant Black Panther. And the mom was also very active had been active in the Black Panther Party. And the defendant called himself like the head of their security. So he was claiming self-defense, and he testified, and he had a huge ego. And I still remember, I said to him, so let me ask you something. I had him go through all of his martial arts training, all of his gun training, etc., how proficient he is with knives. And this guy is just bragging about, how tough he is. And I say to him, so let's assume that I had a knife right now. How close could I get to you? And he says, as close as I let you. So I don't ask the bailiff's permission. I have a pencil in my hand because he is going to claim that the victim had a knife, which doesn't make any sense. He shot 9 times in the back anyway, but they're going to say he had a knife. So I come with a pencil in my hand like a knife, and the defendant is testifying. And what would you do if I came at you with this knife? And I go like this. He grabs my arm, twists it behind, and he's talking to the jury. He says, I could break your elbow here. I could separate your shoulder here. I could break your wrist here. Bailiff is horrified. And I'm destroying this guy because he doesn't understand that by making himself out to be this lethal, Arnold Schwarzenegger, the Rock character, he's killing his self-defense case. And the jury came back with a voluntary manslaughter, even though it was murder. And the reason they came back with voluntary manslaughter was they absolutely hated my victim, who was a despicable person. There's no way around it.
Do the cameras change a trial? And do you think we should have cameras in courtrooms?
I mean, listen, I think people would argue that cameras change how lawyers act. I can tell you honestly, and people that know me, the camera doesn't really affect me at all. But that's only because I'm pretty out there anyway. So I don't play up for the camera. That's just how I am when I'm always in court. You could take any of the cases that I have, and my cases are going to involve a lot of, issues with defense attorneys and just crazy shit going on. But I think most judges that I know, my friends that are judges, would say that in their experience, it affects how the lawyers behave. So I don't know. On the other hand, I think it's important that the public sees what goes on. So I don't really have a good answer.
Another question. If a suspect says I was acting or being sensationalist when making statements, I think this is where Robert Durst was going with that. I was on drug stuff in interviews or a social media post. Can that make a difference? It's sort of like the Alex Jones defense. I'm playing a character. I'm not serious.
I mean, if it's believed, sure. What I would have to ask you is, does that sound believable? Most of the time, it's straight bullshit. That's what somebody says. So the first thing they want to say is, I didn't say that, right? I never said that. Oh, you have it on tape? Oh, okay. Well, I said it, but here's why what I said doesn't mean what you think it means. Or I said it, but I was lying, making it up when I said it. So listen, it's a popular defense. It's only as good as how well you can sell it. And, the reason that I'm a prosecutor, the reason I do what I do is I'm not trying to sell ice to Eskimos. Everybody that I prosecute, they're guilty. If they weren't guilty, I wouldn't be prosecuting them. So all that I have to do is get the jury to actually see what happened. So I don't mind. Come up with your bullshit. I'm confident enough that I can get a jury to see that it's not true.
Have you seen the? I guess it's a review of your examination of Douglas Oliver on YouTube. Have you seen that?
I've never seen it.
I'll send it to you, and maybe next time we'll talk about it. Do you watch interrogations? Do you watch true crime material on YouTube? Do you
no.
social? Are you interested in what court cases are going on?
I mean, my only interest would be that every once in a while there will be a case where I'll go, oh, that'd be a fun case. I would love to prosecute that one. I would love to try that one. It's what was the so it's very funny because when the Doug Oliver shit was going on, the media's like, what's he doing? He's not making any sense, meaning me. He's impeaching him. They had no idea what I was doing or why I was doing it. Doug Oliver is the craziest witness I've ever had in my career.
Oh, it's wild. More than Susan Giordano. There were so many in that trial, or the other woman who was so hard. I'm forgetting her name.
No. Here's what was crazy about Doug Oliver. Doug Oliver, so from the very start, Habib talked to him first. And he was very rude to Habib. And all he wanted to do was he wanted to find out what Habib knew. And he was very rude. It was a quick call, was recorded. I did the second call. And it started off
pretty okay. And then at a point in the call, he's like, he doesn't want to answer my questions, but he says I can call him at a certain point in time. And so he picks the date, and I call him at that time, and he doesn't answer anything. Doesn't answer the phone. I eventually get a hold of him, like a week later. He's like, yeah, I was busy. What do you want me to do? I'm like, well, you pick the date. Hey, what do you want? Hey, I don't like your attitude. I don't like where you're going.
He's so accurate. It's such an accurate station. I can't tell you. Check out the testimony of Doug Oliver. And you played those tapes in court too.
Well, so here's the advantage that I had. I knew I'm taping him, and I knew that at one point in time, we're going to end up coming into court, and I've got the gold mine. So if you listen to the history of the interviews, I let him, he was the biggest asshole to me that I've ever seen in my career. It was so bad that I remember Jeff Savarese, my investigator, it was like, Mr. Oliver, you're not letting him talk. He's having a lecture. If you remember, he then says that he's only coming. I have to gas up his private plane. You can't make this shit up.
With total confidence too. Yeah. He doesn't fly commercial.
So I knew that the jury would hate him, absolutely hate him, and I knew that the jury would believe that Bob had said things to him and that he was lying about it. Remember, his thing was he had told the police originally that he thought Kathy had been sold into white slavery. Okay.
He didn't remember that he said that. And then you asked him, was that something you think you would forget? That was such a...
Right, but then he's like, instead of just saying, which is the truth, hey, I was fucking around with the cops and I wanted to know what they knew and I was saying whatever. He just tried to play dumb. Tried to act like I don't remember what I said, or I don't know why I would have said that, and it just played in. So I had a lot of fun with him. I got to talk to many of the jurors on my case, and a couple of those jurors I became very close with after the trial, and still talk to, and they hated him. I mean, they just thought he was the biggest asshole they'd ever come across, and I don't think they were wrong.
So I guess there was a lawyer reviewing your examination of Doug Oliver, and he was surprised that you could ask those questions. Is there something specific about California that allows you to ask a certain kind of question?
So this is what, when you say the lawyer, what lawyer?
Oh, so it was a lawyer, a YouTube lawyer reviewing your Douglas Oliver. Well, that was the YouTube video.
So here's the difference. I did the impeachment of the witness before I got his information. So normally what you do is you ask a witness certain questions about your case, right? And then you impeach them with whatever you're going to impeach them with. My style's different. What I want to do is I want to demolish you as a witness before you've ever said anything about the case. In other words, by the time you're going to be answering questions directly about the case, you're going to have zero credibility. Now, your credibility is at issue. So the reason lawyers say that is they're only used to doing things one way, and the way that I do it is different. But I know the evidence code backwards and forwards. Judge Wyndham knew the evidence code backwards and forwards. And as Judge Wyndham said at the time, hey, listen, it's unusual, it's unorthodox, but there's nothing that prevents him from doing that. And if you think about it, all the questions that I'm asking are going to his credibility. And his credibility is relevant because my position is he's lying. And the reason that's relevant, he's lying because he has information that's inculpatory to Bob Durst that he's not sharing.
So when we talked before, you said most lawyers are taught that the question is the most important thing. And you said that's so arrogant. What you want to do in examinations is ask the question that has no good answer. What a lawyer would counter to that, another lawyer who sticks by the more rote way where the question is everything and the answers don't matter, is I don't want to open my witness up to scoring points. Is there ever a time when your style opened up a witness to scoring some points?
No. Here's why. In the end, so listen, this is the difference between defense lawyers and prosecutors. You know, when you're a defense lawyer, you're not there to necessarily get to the truth of what happened. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
So for me, I'm not worried about what a witness is going to say, because in the end, what happened happened. So I don't worry about when I'm asking Doug Oliver an open-ended question. There's nothing Doug Oliver can do in the end. Even if he has a good answer to question 1, I'll get him on question 3. And I also know that when I ask open-ended questions, it gives him the opportunity to dig himself a deeper hole. Here's the other thing where I disagree with these lawyers. When you are simply leading a witness, everyone can see you're leading a witness. There is no way that me asking a long question, calling for a yes or a no, is as powerful as a witness giving a long answer in their own words. It's not as powerful.
Why is that? Do you know?
Well, the reason why lawyers ask it is because they want to control what's happened. They don't want the witness to be able to give a long answer. My thing is, I ask questions where you don't have a good answer. I spend an inordinate amount of time figuring out, here's what I've got. Hey, so perfect example, why did you say she was sold into white slavery? There's no good answer for that. There are answers that are worse, but there's no good answer. There's no answer you can give where I go, oh shit, I couldn't ask that one.
So true. I'm thinking about the Charlie Adelson trial that just happened, where the defendant took the stand, and he had spent 7 years studying every wiretap, and I knew he was losing as everyone thought he was winning. I was worried about, one juror I heard was very defendant friendly, but he turned out to be an alternate. But for any fair-minded juror, when you hear a witness say, oh, that's wiretap April 22nd, I said this, and they're tailoring a story around it, it's still bad for the defendant. I don't understand. I don't know what they think these witnesses are going to do,
Well, this is what the problem, from what I know about that case. You had the actual killers who did not know the victim. The only connection to the victims were the dentist, okay? To the victim was the dentist. Right. They don't have any motive. He's got all the motive. He's got all the connections. He's paying the money. So in the end, I don't care how good a job he does, he's fucked by the actual facts. So in other words, and this is something, and I said this to Bob, listen, I've been successful winning my cases. Do you know the number one reason why I win my cases, Roberta?
Because the defendants are guilty?
Because they did it. I'm not, listen, it's a lot harder, if you're, representing people who are guilty and you're getting them off. I'm convicting people who did what they're charged with. Listen, does it take skill? Absolutely. Do I work hard? Certainly I do. But in the end, the number one reason I'm winning is because they did it. And I just have to show it. So for the guy in Florida, in the end, his problem, no matter how good he is on the stand, no matter how much he preps, his problem is he's behind that murder and they've got the evidence to show it. And in the end, he doesn't have anything to say. My memory is what he basically came back with is what he had to do is they basically decided on their own to kind of do this murder for him.
Right, to scare him, and then they extorted him and said, you're next. And it was like some two-part extortion that I never really understood fully.
Now, listen, that's probably the best argument he has, right? Where's he going to go?
So I would have just thrown myself on the mercy of the court, but obviously I wasn't facing those kind of charges.
But you can't. So what I'm saying is that that's the best defense he has. It's a shitty defense. That's the best one he's got, but it's not going to work.
So
A question about how do you feel about tech generally emerging in the courtroom as part of your presentation, are also going up against like a crypto expert? I don't know what they mean by that. Like, I know what cryptocurrency is, obviously, but the first part, how is tech changing your courtroom?
I mean, listen, tech allows you to show things in a very compelling fashion. It also, for me, what I love most about tech and where I use it the most is I will have every statement you've ever given on a clip. And then I can just call out Ethan, clip number 1476, and boom, it's up there. So that's where it's so helpful. Now, I've also been very lucky that I've done cases with people like Ethan and Jim who know a lot more about the tech stuff than I do, because I don't have the ability to do the tech stuff. My brother is also a prosecutor. He's in our Capos unit. He's one of the best lawyers in our office, and he is very good. He does his own presentations. He's almost as good as Ethan is. I don't have his skill.
So what we were talking beforehand, just quickly, because I know people wanted to hear your take on the Dan Markel case. We were talking before we went on about what's the difference between, how do you know when you see someone with a lot of motive, but there's not a lot of evidence? How how do you know? I mean, obviously there's guilty people who will never be tried, right? What's the difference?
I love high motive, low evidence cases. If I have enough where ethically I can go forward and I know I've got the right guy, I'll try those all day. I really enjoy them. What I don't particularly find interesting are high evidence, low motive cases. Those would be like your typical, truck driver who is linked. He's killed 7 women and his DNA, he doesn't know any of them. We have his DNA is in all 7 of them. Okay.
Right.
To me, that's not a very interesting case. It's his DNA is on 7 dead women. He's done. It's not interesting. I love circumstantial cases. My favorite case is where, the wife disappears. Everyone's, it's the husband, but there's not enough evidence. Well, why do you think it's the husband? Maybe there's more evidence than you think there is. I like when I'm not going after a moving target, where I know who it is and I just have to put the case together. That's I think where my skill set has been in my career.
Have you ever thought that it was suspect A and it turns out to be suspect B in the middle of your investigation?
One time. I had a case, a woman named Christine Ting. And Christine Ting was a woman who lived by the Torrance Police Department in a condo in a townhouse. And she was found strangled in her bed in a safe area of Torrance. Her head was covered and she was naked from the waist down. And her townhouse shared a closed garage with a woman who lived next door, African-American woman, and her son, who was in his early 20s, living with his pregnant girlfriend. And even though he was African-American, he was a member of a Hispanic gang. Very unusual. She rented a room to this pipe fitter in his early 50s. My victim was maybe 40, if I remember. So my victim is found strangled in her place, and the son, I'll call him gangster and girlfriend, immediately provided some very interesting evidence about the pipe fitter. He had taken off right after the victim had been killed. I can't remember if it was before her body was discovered or right at the same time. And he was gone for 10 days. And when he came back, he was acting very strangely.
Okay. Go ahead. Go ahead.
It was Jim Wallace's case. And Jim ended up interviewing the guy, and the guy had the pipe fitter had an Asian girlfriend. My victim was Asian, who was in her 30s, and a second woman that he was dating, also Asian, and my victim was Asian. And when they got this guy's alibi, this guy had a long alibi of what he had done that night, including he had gone to this specific Trader Joe's and bought these ingredients. And Jim was able to go back, and he was able to go through Trader Joe's, and the guy is absolutely lying about his alibi. It's untrue. And the guy kept coming back and wanting to talk to Jim. And eventually I came in. I never interviewed him, but I watched Jim's interview, and I'm like, you know what? Yeah, I think it's the guy. But you know, we don't have enough yet. We ended up running DNA off the victim. I can't remember if it was her breast or her fingernails. And we ran the defendant's DNA, and we also, you know, for the hell of it, we got a sample from the gangster. It ended up matching the gangster. The gangster was the murderer. It was not this guy, even though this guy was lying about everything.
Wow.
Even after I ended up getting a confession from the gangster. And the gangster and this guy did not like each other. The gangster did this by himself. We went back up and we re-interviewed this guy, and he still seemed weird. Let me just give you the epilogue to the story because it's interesting. This guy was an absolute, as part of the plea deal, he ended up having to describe how he murdered her. And he would not admit that he sexually assaulted her. He would claim it was a robbery. And he's explaining how he would test. He stole her mail and then knocked on the door and then handed her the mail and then saw that she would put her hand out, you know, testing. So he comes back the day of the murder with steals her mail, she puts her hand out to grab it. He grabs her, chokes her into unconsciousness, thinks she's dead. She wakes up, and he's telling us, she's saying, please don't hurt me. I won't tell. And he looks at us and he says, yeah, I look at her and I go, nah, you're going to tell. And he brings her upstairs and he strangles her. And he also probably raped her, which he would never admit to. So about 5 years after the case, after he pleads on it, I get a call from his lawyer saying he wants to talk to me because he knows there's another person involved. And I go to state prison, interview him, and I do my homework, and I find out that basically he is basically putting in work for the Mexican mafia in prison. He's a very dangerous dude. And I'm even more nervous about being with him because, you know, they smuggle all kinds of weapons. He's serving life. So myself and the detective go in to interview him, and he ends up saying to us, he says, you know, I didn't do this myself. My girlfriend was involved. And if you can get her down here, I can get her to confess. And I say to him, well, you know what? I mean, no problem. We can get her on the phone. He goes, no, she's got to be here. And I say to him, well, how do I know that if we bring her down here, you don't kill her in front of us? And he gets this maniacal look on his face and he goes, yeah, I guess you don't know, do you? And I'm like banging on the thing. We're ready. Get me out of here. So that's one where the only time in my career where I'm going, wow, this guy, he's lying for no reason. The pipe fitter, I have no idea, but he was not involved.
Wow. John Lewin, you have given us twice the time I asked for. Thank you so much for doing this and being so generous with your time and yourself. This has been fascinating. Thank you. Thanks so much for listening, guys. Please hit the thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and I will meet you back here really soon. Have a good night, everybody.